Welcome to the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health's Conversations Over Coffee video series. My name is Pearlyn, and I am the Research and Knowledge Exchange Coordinator for the Center. Joining us today is Sophie Helpard and Abdullah Mushtaq. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
So Sophie is the Executive Director at the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, and Abdullah is the Director of Advocacy at the College Student Alliance. So what we're doing here today is we're just going to chat a bit about student-led advocacy and policy change with regards to mental health.
That's great. We know something about that.
Definitely Director of Advocacy. So what are your organizations focused on advocating for right now?
Yeah, so I guess I can get started with that one. Right now, as an organization, we're really focused on broadening the discussion about mental health to not just focus on on-campus resources. As a provincial organization, it's our responsibility to speak to the provincial government and talk about how not only the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, but also other key ministries can be involved in student mental health, given the size of the population and kind of the scope of the problem that we're seeing with mental health on campus. So we've been broadening our advocacy to focus less on just the transferring of funds to institutions and more so on the bigger picture of the healthcare system.
Okay. So what does that kind of look like on a day-to-day, like when you're talking to the ministers and all that?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I would say together we've done quite a bit of advocacy, speaking directly to the ministers responsible for these portfolios, but also just talking about it in the media and through some of the releases that we're putting out to create more interest in the topic amongst the government, as well as connecting back into the ministry themselves and the people that are delivering service currently and talking about how that they can improve their service delivery for students.
And what about CSA?
Yeah, so we have 4 research priorities for the year. I mean, we're talking about international students, housing, transit, and I'm looking at my notes here. The last one is student or work-life balance for students. So that's what our students voted on. Our membership voted on that. But also we have some advocacy initiatives that we're also taking on, and that includes working with the new government on making sure that students are a priority in the post-secondary education sector moving forward. So we're not exactly sure what that means because the government didn't really cover that during their campaign. So we're just trying to figure out those answers and making sure that all of their stakeholders in the sector are on board with that as well.
For sure. And is there a piece that's specific to mental health that you're as part of your research priority?
Well, I mean, I think mental health at this point sort of crosses into everything.
That's true. That's very true.
It's become that kind of an issue, which is great to see and great to hear. We also focused on it quite a bit last year, and all that work that we're doing with USA and some of the other organizations is continuing forward into this year. So it's not like we've forgotten about it. We're just continuing it, I think, less in a overt and more just sort of behind the scenes.
It's just like integrated into everything else that you do.
Yeah, and I think especially given that we're dealing with a new government coming in, it's important to weave those issues in with so many of the issues students face. We know that there's so many points of stress for students, whether it's things like work-life balance or the cost of education. Mental health needs to be, I think, a continuing thread throughout all of that, and so certainly that's our approach with the new government is some pieces around education on just how important and prevalent an issue this is.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Speaking of collaborations that your organizations have done, there was a great piece that came out last year in It Together that I think was USA, CSA,
the Council of Ontario Universities and Colleges
Ontario. Yep.
Yeah, so there was like a series of recommendations for improving student mental health. So I just want to talk about that a bit. How did you arrive at those priorities and recommendations?
Well, I think one thing that we did as organizations is, I mean, we've always had a strong sort of look at mental health, and our membership has always been feeding into that. So we're pretty plugged in knowing like what the problems are sort of on the ground, what students are facing, and also so we used those conversations to move forward when we were talking to the administration and the colleges and the university side of it. And then from there, we sort of came together and we figured out what their problems are, what administration is looking at. And then we just took some time over the summer and we wrote this paper, basically trying to get at the real root problems and not just solving it by throwing more money at the problem, but by really trying to root out what exactly is going wrong and how we can fix that when everybody comes together.
And certainly I think those summer writing sessions are really helpful because it allowed us to take a look at what was the big picture, what is the really big takeaway that we wanted to have from that document, and we had 26 very detailed recommendations that you could certainly point to. But I think the overarching theme was that whole of community approach that we tended to focus on. that was really looking at the idea that, this is a partnership. That document was very much coming out of a partnership, and that's the spirit that we want mental health care to go down the road of. So we want it to be a partnership between government, institutions, students themselves, everyone that has a stake in the health of a student on campus.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sophie mentioned that those other ministries are like we want them to come in as well, like Children's Youth Services, health, a bunch of different ministries, and it's also just partners on the ground at local institutions as well, right? Make sure that they're involved, whether they're on campus or off campus. If they have a role to play in mental health, we want to hear from them, and we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned the document specifically. I would say for us it was so much more than that. It really involved the advocacy strategy, the kind of roundtables we were doing with stakeholders, sharing it on our campuses. It was a really great way to get people talking about mental health, kind of on the terms that we wanted to present. It's a huge topic, but showing them this report and using that as a starting point, I think, was really successful in getting everyone to the table that we wanted to discuss with.
Yeah.
So have you seen changes happening ever since the document's been launched?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer, we've had a lot of really great feedback from all parties, all political parties, as well as a lot of stakeholders. Because of the timing of the election, we know that our current government has committed $1.9 billion to mental health services. We're hoping to advocate for some of that allocated specifically for students. But we know that the previous government also did kind of reference our approach specifically when they made their announcement about funding were they to be elected again.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty happy with the response. Now it's just a matter of making sure that those conversations continue, and making sure that we're talking with the sort of political side of it, and also the bureaucrats in the government as well, making sure that everybody's on board. So when the funding for that 1.9 billion is announced, we know that it will be going to students in some way or another.
Yeah, it's certainly garnered a lot of attention, and like in the folks that we've been speaking to, like our stakeholders, certainly a lot of people have heard about the document. Yeah.
That's
So
great to hear.
Although speaking of documents, there was an USA paper that came out shortly after that on student health and wellness, where there's a section that's talking about insufficient mental health supports on campus. So we all know that it's not just about increasing the number of counselors on campus, like increasing clinic hours. So just what are your thoughts on that? What can be done? Like, where should funding be going specifically, like for mental health?
Yeah, so I think that's a huge question. In terms of that paper that we released, we have had a student health and wellness paper for as long as I can remember now. But that was our latest iteration, so that was renewed with our current students that are studying at our universities, which is great just because you really get their perspective in the document, and it's not coming from an isolated group of staff members that are in downtown Toronto. So we brought the In It Together report, and we definitely integrated all of those recommendations into our paper. But we also heard from students that the campus interaction is still really important to them, and understanding how the government can keep giving supports to students on campus is something that's really a priority, given that they're the ones that are trying to help their roommates and their classmates seek support. So our approach really there is to look at the In It Together model and the whole community model. And saying, we need resources on campus, but we also need those to be community resources, and they need to be connected. Students need to understand where they can go and the different pathways to support. And also recognizing that diverse services can't always be housed on campus. We can't use a one-size-fits-all solution. And so we have a really great example out of Western University, where they partnered with their local CMHA branch to bring in crisis counseling during the I would say outside of business hours, which coincidentally are the student hours.
Yes.
And that was a really great example of how you can use resources to both support students on campus, but also making sure that they're community-based.
Absolutely.
So I would say that's a really good example of where we want to see that funding go. Yes. And I think that more models like that just continue to emphasize our advocacy on that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that we as the center have also really been trying to push for, in our provincial forums, just trying to bring more people from community organizations and campuses to the table so that these kinds of partnerships can develop. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there. Localized efforts is where I think mental health can really make a huge difference. If you look at, I'll give the example of Centennial, a school that's based in downtown Toronto. They have access to so much more mental health resources than a school like, let's say, Sioux College. That's all the way up in the north,
Absolutely.
right? So making sure the government knows, or whoever is putting together these sort of investments, make sure that they know what exactly is going on, who's involved in the local communities, and what their local needs are, and making sure that there's a direct response to that. I mean, you talked about the making sure that it's responsive to student needs. If you look at Sioux College, there's a bunch of, or there's a higher rate of Indigenous students there. Whereas if you look at Centennial College, it's over 50% international student now. So making sure that we have languages services in one area, or if you have elders in another, making sure that you're really looking at those specific pockets to know that you're tackling the issue in the best way possible. Possible.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because like the campuses are so diverse depending on where they are, what their demographic is like, who is it that they serve. It's something that came up for us as well in like developing our cannabis toolkit, in that like it really depends on like what your campus is like, how they're going to respond. So cannabis, switching gears a little bit, like cannabis has been a pretty hot topic in the sector, and there's just so many concerns from students and staff in what that's going to mean moving forward. I'm just wondering if, that's something that's come up in conversation for you.
Yeah, it has for us, definitely. So we've been trying to figure out what exactly, with the change of government, I feel like everything's up in the air again. But our main priority is making sure that when cannabis is legalized, that there will be a sort of something put out to students, making sure that they know exactly what the what hazards are might happen, and where they can sort of seek help, and what this means for them academically, who exactly should they go to if they need any help, things like that, right? Just an entire sort of toolkit for students, making sure that they understand all the consequences.
Yeah, so there's a lot about education.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so our advocacy on this file has been very similar. I would say it's difficult for us because it's really not our job as student advocates to be dealing with the same ramifications as institutions will be. It's not our job to be setting policy for the residence procedures involving cannabis. So we've been taking a little bit more of a hands-off approach, and mainly just focusing on the education piece, like Abdullah said. Making sure that there's public campaigns about the effects of cannabis, including things like impaired driving, which I think is a side effect that a lot of people have been talking about in the wake of the decision to legalize cannabis. So a lot of conversations, and definitely being at the table to be a resource to institutions and government as they come up with kind of the approach to this, but very interested from the student perspective on how it all shakes out.
And I think that's key, is making sure that as student organizations, we just want to be available as a resource, so when they need us, because when those residence policies come up, or when they talk about maybe training their campus security in terms of how to deal with students, we want to make sure that they know that there's a diversity component to this, and that there's other components that they might not think of, and we want to just make sure that students are protected when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And are there like recommendations that you would give, like for example, like having student focus groups before they roll out any policies, like things like that?
Since we're not too institutional focused, I would say we haven't gotten, like we haven't dipped our toe into the on-campus procedures. We've more so been looking at like what the government can do and how they can best speak to students. So knowing that they're going to be talking about impaired driving generally, how can that message best be delivered to students?
Right,
I would say things like that are where our focus is.
And if you go institution by institution, if they want, they just talk to their student associations. That's probably the best way to get the student perspective on any of these conversations. Reach out to the president or the vice president or whoever it is there, and they'll, I'm sure, be more than happy to sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah, like student organizations are very often like very happy to be involved with these things. We were actually, our previous conversations over coffee was with jack.org, and something similar came up in that, and they mentioned that working with like student leaders is, it's very exciting, it's very rewarding, because there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of excitement in wanting to be involved. Although there is like kind of an issue in that there's just so much. It's so broad. Mental health is permeates everything. So there's some challenges in like directing that energy. So what would you say to students who are wanting to get involved with student government, are wanting to get involved with advocacy? Like, where do you start, and what is this?
Yeah, well, I would say certainly on the advocacy front, that is very much within our wheelhouses. On campus, I know there's so many clubs and services that promote mental health and help support students that are very campus focused, like you said, very much institution by institution difference. But broadly, I would say if you're interested in getting involved with provincial advocacy or institutional advocacy, the best place to go is really your student association. They're the group on campus that has the legitimacy to speak to administration on these issues. And oftentimes that means that they are members of our organizations who then have further kind of legitimacy to go to government and to speak about these issues, having a lot of evidence-based solutions and having done this for a few years, I can personally say that the most energy you can get from students that are on the ground, the better, so that we can do our jobs at Queen's Park and make sure that politicians are listening.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I mean, your student leaders are the students who are going to be talking to your MPs and your MPPs locally. So definitely get involved with the student association. Also figure out what kind of programs they have, what they're running, and if something specifically interests you, then get involved with that directly, right? But I think the student association or the student union is definitely the first place to get involved.
And I was a poli-sci student, so this makes sense for me. I know there's a lot of students that are studying to become professionals and practitioners in this field that have a lot of great opportunities on campus, but for a social science student, this is the road I've chosen. So I don't know if you feel the same way.
No, absolutely,
Yeah, that's great. So I know that USA has a policy symposium coming up in August. So tell us a bit about what's going to be happening at that symposium. Sounds very exciting.
Absolutely. So the purpose behind the policy symposium this summer is to put some of our priorities on the agenda, both of our stakeholders, of government, of fellow student organizations, just to talk about what is important to students right now. And so one of those topics, of course, is health and wellness. So we'll be hosting a panel that has representatives speaking about sexual violence prevention and response, mental health, and also international student health care, which has been, I know, a growing kind of issue for our organizations.
With us as well,
Absolutely. So the idea is to bring in some external voices and kind of speak about the issue in a way that a lot of individuals in the room might not have framed it before. I've been using the phrase, we are often the students at the table with other organizations, but this time we want to host the table and we want to be the table that others are coming to. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity to not only hear from some new faces that we don't always speak to in the post-secondary sector, but also get some great questions from the audience and kind of hear what our stakeholders are thinking and where their heads are at on this issue.
That's excellent.
Well,
and oh, sorry.
I was just going to say one old face is going to be us, and we'll be there.
Yes, you'll be there. Yes, you have to come.
So we're definitely going to be there.
That's great.
That's great. And is CSA doing anything similar?
Actually, we have next week we have a conference here downtown Toronto at Centennial College for our members. So they're going to be coming down. It's just a one-day conference called CSA in a Day. And we actually have a panel about international students as well. And we're also going to be talking about what the new government means for students and just a whole host of other topics. So we're really excited that our student leaders are going to be coming down to Toronto. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if I can speak for both of us, it's a really great time of year right now because a new cohort of student leaders has started in their roles a few months back. So they're really in the position now where they're starting to form those priorities for the year and figure out their action plans. And so it's a great time of year to be working with them, and then September's going to hit soon, and it'll just fly from there.
It's the calm before the storm. For sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This is a really interesting discussion, and for us to hear your perspectives as well. So if you'd like to see more of this, subscribe to our newsletter by going to campusmentalhealth.ca and joining our mailing list. If you're interested in more of these ideas, news, events in mental health in the post-secondary sector, all of that and more is available on the website. Thanks for watching.